So when you're at the very beginning of grief, when it's very raw, when it's very immediate, to me, that's a time to give yourself space to feel it, but it can be just 10 minutes. So I often say, just you can even do a timer if you want to. Put some music on that evokes some emotion for you and let yourself just move for 10 minutes with however you're feeling. And then when the 10 minutes is up, or you could do it for longer, 20 minutes, half hour, but that you cap it so that you know that you can express it, but you're held in a certain time frame so that you're not going to get too lost in the feelings or the emotions.
This is the When You Die podcast. If it has to do with death and dying, we're talking about it. I'm Johanna Lunn, your host today.
With me today is Adriana Marchion. She is an expressive arts therapist, a writer, a filmmaker, teacher, speaker, movement educator, arts therapist, and a beautiful poet. Her first film, When the Fall Comes, showcases a dance piece that she created as a way to process the death of her husband. Welcome, Adriana. I am so happy to have you on the show today. It's a real pleasure. We haven't had anyone on this program who is an arts therapist and a filmmaker and a poet. We've had poets, we've had filmmakers, but you are a great big creative ball of help and salve in this difficult time. So thank you for taking the time out today. I do want to first say I had a chance to look at your beautiful film, When the Fall Comes, which that was your first film. Is that right?
That was my first film. Exactly. Yeah.
And this was inspired by a book of poetry all around your husband's death.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about your motivation going into it and the process for that film?
The motivation was initially to find a way to process my husband passing from lung cancer. He died in, it's 2007. I knew right away that I needed to process it through art in some way. I was doing grief counseling. I had a therapist at the time. I had a lot of ways I was managing first his illness because he was sick for 2 years, and then the dying process, and then the loss of him passing. Because I've been an artist for so long and I've been an arts therapist, specifically expressive arts therapy is the field I'm in for so long, that I knew that I needed to bring it to a creative process. And I had already started writing poems when he was ill. Like I had already just started, putting words down. And for a while I was doing a poem a day. And so these things that were already being channeled, I was able to put those difficult thoughts, emotions, feelings into some form. But then the act of actually starting to do something more concrete, which I wanted to do, like a dance or a performance, it felt compelling, but I just couldn't get to it because I was just in that state of overwhelm after he passed. And then a year later, after he died, then my father died, which was very sudden. So I was in the throes of a grief journey for quite a while. So it took 5 years after the passing of my husband, Eddie, and then 4 years after my father died to actually get to create something that was more substantial, to, I think, feel ready to do that. That's kind of the process. And I think what motivated me was obviously just this desire to practice what I preach. I was always supporting people, like make performance out of it, make dance out of it, write about it, make art out of it. But I hadn't really done that for myself in a long time. I was also having these very intense dreams about my late husband. I wasn't able to really get to it in the therapy I was doing or the grief work I had been doing. There was something, I just felt like I couldn't really get to it in the way that I needed to get some relief because they were actually pretty difficult dreams. So that's a lot of the overview.
Especially as a dancer, a movement person, where do you think emotions are? Are they in our mind? Are they in our body? Being a movement person as well as a thoughtful writer, what do you think about that in terms of when we are processing things, where do we process them? Is it one place, multiple places?
Yeah. I think it is multiple places. There's a framework in the work that I do, which is called the Tamalpa Life Art Process. It's very specific, coming from these founders, Anna Halperin and Daria Halperin, who are both dancers. The idea is that there's these three levels of awareness. And I mean, there's more than three, but physical, emotional, and mental. And of course, there's also the spiritual level too. So often we think there's four levels, but the three levels of awareness is how we're tracking ourselves, right? And so part of what my experience has been and what I teach, what I offer people is this idea of, when we're experiencing something, that it's really happening on these three different levels, and that emotion is held in the body and our stories are in the body and our thoughts do translate to what we feel physically. And so being able to move and, for me, dance and find a way to track and express that through a physical experience is incredibly powerful. You've probably heard this, I'm not sure, but I always love this idea that the antidote to grief is movement, that we need to get out of the constricted places and find a way to move. And there's many different ways we can move to get ourselves to a more free, released place to live again, to find ourselves again.
I think that's what was behind the tradition of keening, of wailing and crying at the time of death, and really moving. I guess you could say it's not just the emotional movement, but there's this kind of spiritual movement that happens as well, and release that happens, so that there is that kind of open channel of process for something that is so overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. I actually was inspired also by this Haka war dance performance that ended up being part of the film that I created. The dancer that was working with me, at one point we had him do this Haka war dance, which was really powerful in terms of finding that energy, that spirit, and moving something in a powerful way. Because for me, there was anger to process, there was sadness to process, there was confusion to process, there was so many emotions to process.
Mm-hmm. Well, this thing I really love about that war dance, and I think the first time it was done at a soccer match, these big Maori soccer players came out and confronted the field and did this fierce dance with lots of vocalizing, huh, huh, kind of stuff.
Yes.
And the other team was so intimidated. Of course, they totally won the day with it. When you think about facing war, facing obstacle, the idea of rousing in this fierce way is really interesting, because we tend to be so polite. And I think that that's an issue in society, how we deal with grief. Like right now, the idea of keening, making lots of noise, wailing, the old kind of Italian movies of the widow throwing herself on her husband's casket. No,
Yes.
don't go. Really carrying on. And the cathartic nature of that, I think it says something about, we're not just polite, the idea that we repress things, we have things lodged in us that we don't even know.
Yes.
Right. What interests me so much about your work, and I know this is very true in trauma work, that different types of body work and body movement can often release old memories or hidden traumas or things like that.
Yeah. And in that also, how to be mindful about the process of supporting others, right? That's something that I always work on is like, how do we help people to release that stuff, but not get overwhelmed? And I think for me, even waiting that amount of time to do something physical and really do a dance around grief, even though I wasn't fully aware of it, I think at the time I felt like, why am I not doing it sooner? Why am I not doing it sooner? But I needed a lot of support to be able to go to those places where I was feeling into the sadness or the desperation, and having people kind of hold and support me, and even having somebody else do that war dance, because somehow it was very cathartic, and it was, I think, maybe too much for me to fully do myself, but having him do it and witness that, I felt like, yes, that's how I feel. There's something so chaotic and so incredibly dismantling about going through this, that having it be expressed in this very intense, wild, abandoned way felt so important.
Being safe is so important, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what happened for me is it ended up being so transformational because I had a team of people holding and supporting the process. So I wasn't going into the studio alone. I did sometimes. And of course, there was a lot of things that I did do alone, the writing and some of the practicing and rehearsal over time. But all of a sudden, I had a team and I had a structure to
Mm.
hold me of, oh, I do this part of the dance. And then there's this time where I read the poem. And then there's all these ways that I was held. And so for me, I often try to support people to have a map when they're doing a performance about their grief, that we have a map and we have a lot of things that can help them express and feel and release, but not be re-traumatized by the experience.
Well, have you worked with other people through their grief as well?
I work with addiction, with grief, and trauma. So those are the three prongs. People come to me, and people come to me for all different reasons. And I work with a lot of artists and creatives and people in general. A lot of people come to me for those specific challenges. And what I often try to do, and have supported people to do something similar to what I have done, which is use the art to channel and express their stories. And sometimes it's been in a performance setting where they actually do something similar, or it's been writing about it or creating a project around their grief journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually. I just find it so rewarding. And it's like all of a sudden being able to translate that, let people see how transformative it can be. I had someone come to me who saw my film. So he saw my film and he contacted me and said, I was so moved. I think it had been a year before that. His wife had passed from cancer. And he wanted to meet, and we met, and he said, I want to do something similar. I want to create a piece to honor her. And so we started doing that together. I think we spent about 6 months, and then we got to the point where it was kind of time to think about, okay, well, do you want to show it to an audience?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, I just want to do it for you. It's too much to do it to an audience, but I just want to do it for you. So we did that. And then I think it was 2 years later, he came back to it. We shaped it even more. And then he did actually invite a whole bunch of his friends and family and did this beautiful poetry, spoken word, read letters that she had written him and he had written her. He danced. He had this really beautiful soundtrack, and it was incredible. And he still to this day tells me how much it changed his experience to grief, and it built a bigger community. And recently, someone that was there at that performance contacted me, and now she's going to do a piece around her father passing. It's just been so meaningful to me to be able to help people do this. It's like I'm midwifing their journey through grief, through the art process.
In what way do you think it is transformative for people? Where do they begin, and where does the journey take them?
The creative process has this ability that all these things that we're holding or that are unconscious even sometimes, that we maybe want to tap into, or we feel like it needs a voice, but we can't fully get to it, fully understand it, that it starts to bring some of that out. To me, that the art, whether it's again writing or dancing or making visual art, etc., that we can start teasing out some of those undescribable feelings, thoughts, and experiences. So I think that's one thing, is it helps us document what we've been through. And it also helps us to distance ourselves. I had that even this morning working with somebody, a client that I was working with, where we were just really exploring a very difficult feeling for her and putting it into kind of imagery and the landscape. And all of a sudden, she felt better. She felt more like herself because she wasn't just in it, she was able to see it with distance. And so to me, that's part of what the art does, is it gives us this perspective to start being a witness to our experience rather than just being overwhelmed or confused or drowning in the feelings. So I think that's part of what it does, right? It gives us a voice so we can document, and then it gives us this ability to have distance. And then also, if we do it, and that's why I always advocate for people to have a guide or have a community to support them, that then if we have people that can come and be a part of that, that then we don't feel the isolation anymore of the grief, which is so much, as you know, a big part of grief is feeling very alone. So it also builds this feeling of connection and purpose and community.
The echoes for me, thinking about actually how we support people at end of life, the importance of making meaning of our life. It sounds a little bit like the process that people can go to have some distance in a way is being able to make some meaning out of it, some,
Yes.
as you say, perspective, and then the audience validating. Similarly, at end of life, validating people's experiences is so important.
Yes.
Whether you agree with them or not, or what, that almost doesn't matter. It's about them, about saying, yeah, that's right. That's so interesting.
Being able to really be seen and heard and understood, having that validation, I think is hugely important for me too. Like I've been through the grief process. And so when I'm with somebody and they, oh, you get it, you understand, right? I think that also is really meaningful and helpful. And I just want to say the other thing that came up for me when you were saying that is I just listened to the podcast with the hospice nurse,
Julie McFadden.
She was talking about visitation, people having these visitations at end of life. And I at first thought she was talking about people who had lost somebody having a visitation, because it goes both ways. Like I had a lot of visitations, it felt like, from my late husband and from my father. In some ways, I think about the imagination is very alive and creative. There's a lot of things that come. And so art also helps to document, but also maybe get more of a grasp on, like, wow, what's happening in these dreams? What's happening in these visions?
Mm-hmm.
Art brings us into that liminal space, that in-between space where we're really altered and sometimes in a disturbing way, right? When we're feeling the trauma of what's happened, but also it can bring us to that altered in a very connected way where we might feel closer to our loved ones. Mm-hmm. We might feel like they're speaking to us, or we're in that realm that can feel very magical, can feel very resourcing and enlivening. So I think too, for me, that when we can tap into that liminal space of art making, it really is akin to the dying process or the grieving process. Or the birthing process.
The birthing process, definitely. It's opening our perception, right? That really, because we're very narrow most of the time, going to the grocery store, get in, get out, all the tasks of living that kind of keep us, I don't want to say hamster wheel, because that's really too harsh, but it's just the everyday part of living. We're very focused in a material way. Even when I get together with friends for a cup of coffee or lunch or something, there's a certain time-based element to it. But going out in the woods or being an arts practitioner, you allow yourself to open more. People who meditate a lot, having that accessible to us all the time, but we kind of have to have to-dos in order to do it. Or the other side of it is that our world cracks open and it's no longer a choice. You're in the middle of it. And when that happens, well, you just don't have any choice about it.
Yeah.
I think it's that creative space, that liminal space that you're talking about, which is the birth-death space, is part of being human that we don't really talk about.
Yeah. We don't. And to me, art is a great practice of moving from that ordinary to the extraordinary. Like it brings us to this place where we can feel more, we can sense more, we can practice hanging out in that space. It's very potent. It's hard sometimes for people to allow themselves to take the time. When I work with people often, and there's so many resistances to doing the practice of making the art they want to make or doing the project they want to create. And that grief rituals is something like an art ritual. I often say that we're taking this time, we're trying to drop in, and then how do we then really allow ourselves to be in that space? And then we have to come back out again. And those transitions in and out are also good practice, right? And I like what you said about sometimes we don't have a choice. Like I've definitely felt that in the process of being with someone who ended up going through a real passage with his cancer that first seemed like he was going to survive it. And then he kept going back in and out and then didn't end up being able to fight it and survive. So going in with him in that very murky place of someone passing, and then the murky place of grief, which was very hard for a very long time for me. And so just finding those anchors, like I'm often also trying to help people find those anchors, like how do we shore up in the process and get ourselves back to, sometimes ordinary life feels really good too, right? Just the ordinary can be so grounding.
Fear is really a lot more pervasive in our society than we really let on. We're afraid people don't like us. We're afraid that we're not doing a good job. Many of us are very critical of ourselves and don't practice self-love and compassion very well. It's not taught. And I think when we are in crisis, and no bigger crisis than death, really, and dying, fear can be really acute. Not just the fear of what would my life be like without this person, but just some incredible terror of the unknown.
Yeah.
I think that's something that in art you can really ask yourself, what is the fear about? What am I afraid of?
Yeah.
There's multiple exercises that are kind of like this, like 3 questions. You ask yourself, what am I afraid of? And answer it, write it down. What am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? Sometimes you do it 6 times or whatever it is. And each time what it is changes and changes and changes until you're distilled into something that's a little meatier and you go, oh, I see.
Yeah. And distilling it down to what's the worst thing here that could happen? And ultimately it is like, I could die. When I trail it down with people, that's, well, I'm going to die, or I'm going to lose everything, or I'm going to lose somebody, right? It's often about what we're going to lose. Tomorrow I'm doing a class on creative blocks, and a lot of it is resistance and fear and the inner critic. Fear is just so big. Like you said earlier, it's not going to be good enough, or I'm going to get in there. There's going to be nothing there, or maybe existential too. Like, why even bother to do it anyways? It's just so much about how do we embrace our life. To me, the creative process is about enlivening and also claiming our truth, our voice, our life force. Art is really about that for me. And that's part of what I always try to hold on to and help people remember that. So essential to who we are. And we get to create our life. My late husband was a jazz musician, and he was amazing about creating his life. He was a very big person, and he actually created a very conscious death for himself as well. And that, had a lot of meaning for me to witness that. Yeah.
Amazing. If any of our listeners are sort of wondering out there, well, how do I get started? What do? I want to move my grief in a healthy way, not to speed it up, but so that it's generative. Any tips?
I often try to support people to keep it really simple. And also, there's different phases, right? So when you're at the very beginning of grief, when it's very raw, when it's very immediate, to me, that's a time to give yourself space to feel it, but it can be just 10 minutes. So I often say, you can even do a timer if you want to. Put some music on that evokes some emotion for you, and let yourself just move for 10 minutes with however you're feeling. And then when the 10 minutes is up, or you could do it for longer, 20 minutes, half hour, but that you cap it so that you know that you can express it, but you're held in a certain time frame so that you're not going to get too lost in the feelings or the emotions. Or you do it with a witness. You have somebody there supporting you, like if you have a therapist or if you have somebody close to you. And so maybe they're there and you can feel like afterwards you can talk to them about what happened, or you can write about what happened afterwards. The same thing could be true about writing or a piece of art, right? Is that just allowing yourself to tap into one thing that you're feeling. Mm-hmm. So I'm noticing that I'm tight in my chest, or I'm noticing a well of sadness in my belly, or I'm just so overwhelmed I don't even know how to express myself. So I can start with the overwhelm. But like wherever you are, and your body often is a guide, that you can just take that feeling, I am overwhelmed, I am feeling this well of sadness, and just start there with a drawing or a color or a line, and then just see where it takes you, so that something gets out. And I often say, just you could do it 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day or once a week. You can take a little time to express something. Over time, what I also love is when I'm helping somebody build a project or a practice that's more substantial, when they feel ready to really shaping something, that to start just gathering things, like gathering memories, gathering photos, gathering different feelings and experiences and your own stories about the process, and just start gathering them in whatever way you can, with a notebook or little 3x5 cards, or different ways to do it. So those are a few little things to say to start.
Those are wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I did also want to talk just a little bit about your most recent film, Creative High, based somewhat on your own journey or the inspiration for your own journey with addiction, and follows a number of different types of artists. Can you tell us about it?
Definitely. Yes, the Creative High documentary took 6 years to make the film, and right now it's on the festival circuit. I'm actually, after my class tomorrow, I'm going to Las Vegas for a women's film festival where we're up for an award. And I've been in recovery from addiction for 29 years now, from alcoholism. I've been an artist. My addiction was really entwined with my art. I felt like my artist identity was really tied into the suffering artist, tied into a community of people who were drinking and using, and a lot of abuse. And so when I got into recovery, it was a grieving process in itself to come into recovery. You're losing this coping mechanism. You're losing, in some ways, part of you. And so I had to recreate myself in recovery. And I also had to recreate my artist identity, which took a long time. And that was back in the early 90s. Now the recovery movement is very big and there's so many resources, but at the time I felt lost in terms of how to shape that creative life. And so for me, I've, supporting people over time to deal with how to be an artist and be in recovery has been a big part of my passion and mission, in addition to supporting people with grief. Finally, when I wanted to make a second film, it was like, what would I do? What would I do a film about? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is just basically the cornerstone of my life and my work. So yeah, I'll do a film about addiction and art. So there's 9 different artists from all different perspectives: musicians, visual artists, performers, dancers. And in different ways, we weave their stories, and they talk about recreating and using art as a transformative tool. As you know, making films yourself, it's a labor of love. It takes a village, and it has taken a village, and I've had to pull on all my resources to get it out in the world. But it's happening.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I will see if there's any festivals I can get to, because as a filmmaker, there's nothing better than to see films on a big screen.
I know. We had one that was supposed to happen in person that I was back east for, and they ended up putting it all online, which was so disappointing. But I hope that this one is definitely going to be live and in person with people. So yeah, it's a great feeling. It's a great feeling to share art and to get to the point of being able to have something and hope it's an inspiration for others. And that's a lot of why I've made these films, is to help people to think about, like, how can I use art as a pathway through grief, addiction, trauma? How can I do it? And to learn from others who've been successful doing that themselves.
The world needs it.
Yes, we certainly
really
do.
need art, and we need good guides who can take us through the process. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for everything that you do in the world.
No. Thank you. Well, now, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to share?
I feel just it's such an honor to talk in this depthful way with you about the work and about the work of grief and also addiction and art. And I have my poetry book, actually.
Oh, could
And
you read something for us?
I was thinking about dreams earlier, and then I thought I should read a poem, and I forgot to mention it. So I'm wondering which one I should choose. Let's see here. Okay. I think I'm going to choose When the Fall Comes.
Oh, great. That's beautiful.
It's short, and it's actually was why I ended up titling the performance and the film. It's from When the Fall Comes, a poem chronicle of loss, memory, and dreams. When the fall comes, I am lost in my dream in a dimly lit dance hall, weightless and vacant, walking alone with people streaming around me, anonymous, strange. An embrace catches me from behind and dances with me. Small, sweeping steps of sensual care. I am held. It makes no sense, yet it is everything as I am falling.
I love that. I know we didn't talk very much about dreams. It's certainly my third film. There's a lot more in there about deathbed dreams and events that happen both for the person who's dying, for almost like a gift for the people who are left behind. And that poem just sizes it all up so beautifully. It's like this loving embrace.
Yeah. And also, I think for me, the image of falling, which became a metaphor, which I often work with people on movement metaphors. And that became so significant. And so I fell, and I fell literally, and I fell as I was starting to craft my performance. And I fell, and then my partner, Travis, who was doing the work with me, he kept catching me. And, so we worked a lot on this idea of falling and then being held or being caught or sometimes free falling. This dream that did inspire this particular poem I just read, I mean, it was so visceral. And to me, art catches us. Art catches me and has over time and over time. And I just try to help people remember that our art is a container. It does help us to move through anything that comes our way. It has limitless capacity, and we can always rely on it. And that, to me, is a huge gift.
It is an amazing gift.
Yeah. It's nice to just be here and breathe with you in these silent moments as well.
Yeah. I agree. Well, this is probably a good place to leave that.
Yes.
In that beautiful, gentle space of not knowing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to share my work with your audience.
It's a total pleasure, and I look forward to hearing all the rave reviews from Creative High and maybe catch up with you down the road again.
That sounds wonderful. I hope so.
This conversation is brought to you by the When You Die Project. From existential afterlife questions to palliative care and the nuts and bolts of green burial. If it has to do with death, we're talking about it. WhenYouDie.org.